Hey everybody. Okay, so yesterday, of course, I wasn't at work physically, and so y'all did that assignment. That was a great introduction to the Industrial Revolution because it literally took you through, of course, the development of the towns and cities due to the introduction of factories and the movement of people, and then of course the differing social dynamics changing, and so hopefully that was kind of a fun thing to do. Um, so with that being said, we're starting Unit 11, which the first lesson is the Industrial Revolution, but we're also going to be talking about European imperialism. And if you're kind of like, well, haven't we already done that with the age of exploration and colonization? Well, there's still a whole lot of the world that ends up being colonized by the great powers of Europe, even into the early 1900s. So, nope, not done yet with all of that. And then you're going to see also more revolution. I know if you're kind of like, oh my gosh, the French Revolution, that was enough for me. I don't want to do it again. Sorry. There's some more coming at you in 1848. So that's that. And all of this, I want y'all to kind of bear in mind because all of my students get so excited to do the world wars. So when we're going through Unit 11, I'm going to consistently be kind of like making references to, this is kind of what starts to inch its way to the cause of World War One. Imperialism, industrialism, all of those things, nationalism, all of those things feed into World War One. So this, as I told you guys, history is just kind of an ongoing story, and the characters and the events all feed off of each other. So it's important to remember everything because it all goes together. All right, so the Industrial Revolution, as you know, hopefully after your activity from yesterday, begins in Great Britain in the late 1700s. And it's one of those things that, like, all the right stuff was happening in this one place in time that leads to this innovation and this massive change. And the thing that I want you to understand about the Industrial Revolution is it is honestly as important to the world and how we live and culture and just everything. It is as important as the Neolithic Revolution. And if you're kind of like, I think I've heard that, you have, but it's been all the way back in lesson one. The Neolithic Revolution was when we went from like hunter gatherer to learning how to plant crops, domesticate animals, and then we started civilizations. Guys, the Industrial Revolution, I'm not kidding, is really just as impactful on the world. So it begins in Great Britain. And first, in the early part of the 1700s, they had kind of an agricultural revolution. So they had started to figure out some new and innovative ways to deal with agricultural production. So, like the plow, they had welded pieces of iron into claws, and then of course that was being dragged by the horse, and all of a sudden you can till an entire row with that, or maybe even a few rows if you can kind of get them all welded together instead of people sitting there like hoeing manually. And so, I mean, that's just like one example of things that were, one example of the things that were created. But with the invention of new ways to go about agriculture, like the plow, that eliminates the need of peasants, right? Or not as many peasants. Like, you just don't need as many people working a farm if you have this piece of equipment. And so, it just changes society even at that point in time. But because you have better yields agriculturally, the food supply increases. Crops that are hardy, even when the little ice age like rears its ugly head, like the potato, people are able to kind of sustain themselves better. The price of food drops because you are having better yields, higher productions, especially once the late 1700s rolls around in early 1800s when the little ice age kind of starts to dwindle a little bit. This increased food supply leads to a population growth. And, so people are, that overall their standard of living is higher, they're eating better, they're healthier. Britain, of course, is mother country, at this point in the history to a massive percentage of the world already. And it's just going to continue to grow until they're like the mother country to like 65% of the globe. And so because of this, they have an incredible amount of money or capital coming in, which also raises the overall standard of living. Overall, they have a period of peace as well in the 1700s. Remember, their revolution that set up their constitutional monarchy was in 1688. So you don't have all of these issues as dominantly occurring in British society as, like, say, French society that we just studied with the revolution. And this goes all the way back even to Unit 1 when when we were talking about how civilizations form. Well, the higher standard of living a civilization has, well, the more outside of the box thinking can occur, right? Like if your basic needs are being met and you don't have to consistently worry about how am I going to get food on the table tonight for my family, then all of a sudden you can be like, well, how could I invent something to make this a little easier on me? Your brain power is able to be divided to multiple things instead of just food, shelter, things like that. So with the inventions that come about in the Industrial Revolution, like steam engines and, coal powered mechanisms and things like that, well, you have to have the natural resources to back up how those sources of power get going. And Britain had that as well. They had massive amounts of moving water, which of course is that's a lot of times how they powered a lot of these factories was with the water wheel. You have coal, you have iron ore pretty abundant in Britain. And so this also just helps amplify their status as the workshop of the world, which that's what their nickname becomes. And then because they have so many colonies, they are able to get these new ideas out there. They're able to experiment with them. They're able to, kind of move them into other areas to exploit, and so it all culminates into kind of the perfect little situation, historically speaking, that the Industrial Revolution would get started in. So the factories are going to spring up. The shift in innovation goes from ag to the textile industry, which textiles, of course, are like clothing, cloth. And, instead of having like one single spinning wheel or loom in a home, now they had great big mechanized looms that could mass produce large sheets of cloth. Instead of just, these strings that then you had to sit there and push together and then create the sheet, and the sheet still wasn't that big. Like now all of a sudden we have massive looms that are creating these massive sheets on a mass scale of cloth. And so that was kind of that was the next big jump in innovation. So it was, hey, let's build a building and see how many of these things we can stick in there, and see what happens. Because at the end of the day, the original factory system and the original, of course, Industrial Revolution was all just a great big experiment, right? Let's see what we can do. Let's see how much money we could potentially make off this if we have a whole bunch of them. And so this actually was perfect for these peasants that were being outsourced by these new ag machines, because now, hey, we need you in the factories. And so they moved out of the countryside and into the city. So you see a massive urbanization happen. So people, the rise of population within cities happen during the Industrial Revolution as well. And now they are able to work 6 days a week, come rain, snow, sleet, or hail, because they're inside. And this completely changes society because now the mom's working, the dad's working, the children are even working consistently, earning wages. And this is how you get the new rungs in the social ladder. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, you basically had like your nobles and your super wealthy, and you had, like a small middle class, but then the majority of your people were like poor peasants. Well, now all of a sudden you have not just the nobility and the wealthy and the middle class and the peasants, but now you have like an upper middle class, a lower middle class, a working class, and then the peasants. So now there's like multiple rungs on the ladder, and therefore there's a place for a lot of these peasants to potentially climb that had never existed before. I mean, prior it was like, oh, you were born a peasant, well, you're going to die a peasant. Well, now all of a sudden, these entire families are working in these factories. And hey, Junior's been over here working in this factory since he was like 10. He knows the ropes, right? Like maybe by the time he's a man, an adult, he'll be like in mid management. So he's not, kind of, maybe he doesn't stay in the working class. He goes up into the lower middle class, or maybe even Junior's kids end up being middle to upper class because they understand the dynamics of this particular factory and how it works so well. I mean, or maybe they think of something new that propels the system even more, and they make money off of an innovation and things like that. So I mean, this and that had never existed in the world prior to the Industrial Revolution. You didn't have that mindset and that dynamic that honestly we take massively for granted now. Like, you're asked when you're a little kid, what do you want to do what do you want to be when you grow up? Prior to the Industrial Revolution and this kind of post-industrial world that we live in, those conversations didn't happen. It was, I'm a farmer, you're a farmer. Period. End of story. And so it really did truly change the world. I've been telling students all day today, and I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going to get a bit off on a soapbox here, but it's important for you to also see this, because y'all's generation will be, I believe, on the ground floor of so many of these changes. If you look at our society, guys, we're living very much in a parallel situation to the Industrial Revolution era, because we are living in the technological revolution era. And so much of what we are doing technologically is an experiment, right? It's a huge, now it's morphed into a massive, almost global experiment in the sense of technology is affecting everyday life, everybody all around the world. But it's eventually going to have to be regulated. Just like when the factories first got started, it's not like people who owned and operated and started them up could see forward and see that, oh, people's hands are going to get chopped off, and they're going to lose fingers, and we're going to have all of these issues with their lungs filling up with dust, and causing premature death, and these kids are going to have all of these like there's no way that they understood or could see that that was going to be what happened. Just like Mark Zuckerberg, probably in his dorm room at Harvard when he's 19, 20 years old, thought in his mind, well, my Facebook is eventually going to lead to heightened percentages of anxiety and depression in teenagers, along with suicide rates. Like, he didn't know that that was what's going to start to happen, but nonetheless, that's what's happening. And so therefore, just like you see regulations and reform happen because of the factory system, so therefore we have only 8 hours a day that we can work. Otherwise, you get paid overtime. Children cannot work, so therefore they go to school. All of these reforms and regulations started happening. I think you're going to see the same thing within the next 20, 30 years happening in technology. You're going to start to see regulations and reforms that try to shift how we use that, because there is a lot of it that is detrimental. But anyways, that's my little soapbox, like I said, that I've been getting on today, and I don't want my online students not to hear it either, because I think you are going to see it very much so. But early factory owners, again, for a peasant, this was incredible. I mean, yes, it was dangerous at times, but it was amazing because I can work 6 days a week, again, make regular money, with a repetitive task that, yes, is manual labor, but compared a lot of times to what they were doing farm work, it was relatively easier. Don't get me wrong, it was still really hard work. And sometimes obviously around all of these machines that they really didn't understand, it could be incredibly dangerous, if not deadly work. But really, so could farming at times. So this is a great video. It's about 8 minutes or so. It's the same guy that I showed you from the Glorious Revolution. And it's all about kind of looking at the factory and how it emerged and also how it changed things in Great Britain. So watch that for me, please. So the spread of industrialism clearly starts to happen by the early 1800s. And then, of course, it really is spread even all the way to the United States by the late 1800s. That's when the United States has our industrial revolution. It's going to happen in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. These are when we get our famous, robber barons is what we call them now. But, this is how Rockefeller emerges, and Carnegie and JP Morgan and Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla. Their innovations during the Industrial Revolution are what's going to propel the United States forward as an industrialized nation. And you can see the spread specifically in this map across Europe. This is another great video that I'm only showing it in clips because it's like 15-20 minutes, but I challenge you to watch it. At the beginning of every Olympic Games, there is an opening ceremony, and the host country usually showcases in a theatrical manner their culture and their history. And so the 2012 London Olympics was an amazing theatrical showcase of British history. And there's this entire section that shows them going from agriculturally based to the Industrial Revolution and becoming the workshop of the world. And it's just a really cool, like, artistic look at it. The guy that's narrating even makes the comment, like, this is my kind of history lesson. And so, I just think that they're neat. I challenge you to watch any Olympic opening ceremony that you can get your eyes on, because they're really a cool way to look at that host country's culture and history. Like Brazil had a really neat one in 2016 when the Olympics were in Rio. It showed, obviously the indigenous side of things, and then it showed when the Portuguese landed and began colonization, and then the African slave trade, and then how all of that has blended into this, of course, highly unique culture of Brazil. So again, this is cool because it shows, again, that agrarian world at the beginning shifting into industrialism. So I was talking about this earlier, the social rungs of the ladder, and there's more there now. These peasants are given the opportunity now to become working class, or again, lower middle class, eventually leading maybe to generations forward becoming middle to upper middle class. And that just hadn't happened before in history. And population again increases. You have a decline in death rates. You have a decline overall in regular war. I'm not saying that war stops. I mean, because come on, it's human nature. But you don't have as many, right? Like, I don't know if y'all have noticed in the last few units, like there's always been like little, war. They last like 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, 70 years. I mean, like there's always some type of like conflict taking place. And that you still have conflict, but again, not as consistently, not as long. They're dealt with in a different manner. And, again, because people are having an increase in their standard of living, like overall, they're just doing better. Like you don't have as many people just dying left and right as we used to. So all of this leads to societal change. And again, these new social classes also, shake up politics, right? I mean, hey, now all of a sudden, with the peasants becoming working class or middle class, they're also learning how to read and they're learning how to write, and so they're getting more involved in what is taking place within our country and what are our leaders doing about these certain things. And the new industrial middle class just shakes all kinds of things up. So, working conditions in factories, as time moves forward, yes, it gets really bad. I mean, you've got 12 to 16-hour days, 6 days a week. You know, Nothing is heated or cooled. It's just dirt or concrete, maybe flooring. Children, of course, are part of the labor industry because they had always been a part of the agrarian labor industry. I mean, peasant children were out on the farm working, so why wouldn't they work in the factories? Was kind of the mindset. But you're out in fresh air, even though, don't get me wrong, like still manual labor, it's still very difficult. But the factory conditions are very, very different to that of being outside on a farm. And these children, were being placed down in coal mines and just anyways, it just ends up being pretty tough. And then if you lose your hand or your finger or your arm or your, whatever, there isn't any type of like workman's comp or ability to, you know, gain insurance and then unemployment and then try to figure out what my next steps are and what I could do considering that I've lost this limb and things. Like none of that existed. It was, I'm so sorry that you lost your arm. I've got like 10 people waiting outside to take your place. Like, good luck. I mean, that was the end of it. And again, there was no minimum wage. There were no guarantees. It was a dog eat dog world. And again, because of all of this, you have the rise of reformists and you have the progression towards, hey, things have got to change. We have got to regulate this stuff so that, children aren't in danger, aren't working these insane hours. If someone does get their arm chopped off, there's some type of security that we can give them for a little bit, so that their family isn't just destitute. Obviously, if kids can no longer work in the factories, where do they go? This is how public education really starts taking off, because parents are like, well, if they can't come with me to work, I've got to send them somewhere. You go to school. And, this is also how you end up with the Communist Manifesto and Karl Marx, right? This is how you end up with people looking at the factory system and saying there's a lot more factory workers than there are factory owners. And if conditions are this bad, why don't they like rise up and like take control of the factory, and why don't they own the means of production instead of all of the profits going to one man? And so, that is how the Communist Manifesto like gets its roots. It's looking at the working class and their conditions and saying, this is why the Communist Manifesto and Marx's famous quote, is workers of the world unite. Again, like that is its basis. It's really not, and history has shown us this time and time again, a sustainable governmental model. You just have too many variables in there. Everybody working for the greater good, it just goes against human nature. And I hope that you've seen that time and time again in my class. Like, human beings aren't capable of being that selfless day in and day out. Like, at the end of the day, we are going to watch out for like number one and protect our families. And yes, like we don't want anything overall bad to happen to the collective group, but that whole, like, if I work right along somebody else day in, day out, even though I'm really doing better than they are, but we still go home with the same pay, that's your means of production is just going to eventually come to a halt because no one is going to feel the need to work hard or be innovative anymore. And again, like the examples of this are rampant, especially in the 20th century with the Soviet Union and communist states coming about because of all of that. So, so the bourgeoisie is the middle class, of course, and Marx refers to the working class as the proletariat. And again, he is also looking at things not only from the factory and saying the factory is really bad and we need to reform that, but he's looking at this in terms of you also need democracy. Like, these people need a voice, these people need a vote. And a lot of Europe, even especially at the time that Marx was looking at all of this and writing the Communist Manifesto, he sees monarchs, okay? And he's going, you've got to gain reform, you've got to gain change through a vote, through democracy. And so if you look at his arguments in terms of the time frame that he's writing them, it makes sense if you apply it to factory conditions and you apply it to monarchs fighting against democratic ideas and revolutions. But overall, again, as a sustainable governmental model, it doesn't work. And so, that's something that I'm just trying to kind of like break down the Communist Manifesto and Marx as a whole. So this is just a quick video on him, just giving you a quick bio about kind of who he was. So, the first round of the Industrial Revolution, as it says, gives rise to, agricultural innovation, textiles, your railroads, things based with iron and coal. The second go round of the Industrial Revolution, which is really kind of when, again, the United States gets involved and starts their own, you see the rise of steel and chemicals and electricity and petroleum. Again, this is where we get, this is Rockefeller and Carnegie and Edison and Tesla. And, again, I'm just trying to give out American names because that'll help you kind of, again, hopefully put a context to the time frame and mindset. And so that second one, again, is going to take place during much of the 20th century. And of course, we see massive innovation and shifts throughout the 1900s. I've always said that if you could live like in 100-year time block and see society like change the most, I feel like it would be from 1900 to 2000. Because I mean, you would think if you were born in 1900, you were traveling like with horse and buggy, right? Like the development of the vehicle and Henry Ford's assembly line and all of that had not happened within, it does happen obviously within the first part of the 1900s, but when you were born and little, I mean, very, very likely you were seeing horse and buggy. And if you lived to be 100, by the time that you died, you were seeing jet engines and planes and a man on the moon. And I mean, like, so it's just crazy what the Industrial Revolution does and changes. So with the assembly line being talked about, by 1913, you've got Henry Ford, with this new manufacturing method that just changes everything. I mean, literally, like the McDonald's brothers thought about how do we mass produce hamburgers and used Henry Ford's like assembly line idea to create modern fast food joints. And of course, they were the ones that did it first, the McDonald's brothers. And then all of a sudden we see, places like Taco Bell and Burger King, all follow suit. And so even the rise of just fast food industry was a offshoot of the industrial giants like Henry Ford being innovative and creating new ways to mass produce things and manufacture products. So all of these new job opportunities and change and shifts in society are clearly going to open the door to not just a movement from peasants into middle class and working class, but for women. And this is going to change, going to start changing them as well. They're going to say, hey, we're working, we're contributing to society. We're doing more than just simply like staying at home with babies. So why don't we get the vote? And you're going to see this huge push for women's suffrage also happen. And the world economy is just going to take off. It's going to get stronger. It's going to become more globalized. And you are going to see the variety of goods really become available all over the place. I mean, we take for granted walking into Walmart or HEB and being able to grab a pineapple, being able to grab, a coffee easily, being able to have, I'm trying to think of another example, mangoes. I mean, like I always go back to produce because I feel like, having our hands on all of these products that normally prior to industrialization would have never been available. We take it for granted every day. So, and again, all of this shifts and changes because of this one event that starts in Great Britain in the late 1700s and then becomes, massively important to the rest of the world and still to this day is massively important. This is another great video. It's talking about the road to World War I. So a lot of the things that he's going to mention are things that are going to be brought up in the next unit. But as I say, it never hurts to hear things more than once. So this will be a great video to kind of end the lesson on as well. So that's it. That's lesson 1. I'm not getting through all of that today in class, but I will start lesson 2 tomorrow in class. And again, I will just do like one video. And we're only doing lesson 1 and 2 this week. So if you're kind of like, are we going to try to squeeze all of this into 3 days? No. So we'll do lesson 1 today and a little bit in tomorrow. We'll do lesson 2 tomorrow and a little bit into Thursday. And you will also take your formative assessment over lesson 1 and 2 on Thursday. And then it'll be Easter. And then we'll come back and finish everything up. So if you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask. And y'all have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye.